Hello, I'm doing a movie review, and the movie I want to review is Suspiria, which is a remake of the 1977 Dario Argento film of the same name, which was the first film in Dario Argento's Three Mothers trilogy. It's a film that he would follow up with two sequels, Inferno in 1980 and The Mother of Tears in 2007. Now, I'm doing this review as sort of a late addition to Horror Month, which is something I do every October, and yes, I'm aware we're well into November now, so this is sort of a late installment of 2018's Horror Month, but the reason I wanted to review this movie is because for this year's Horror Month, towards the end of it, I was reviewing newer films in franchises that I reviewed in the past, and for Horror Month of 2016, I reviewed all three films in Dario Argento's Three Mothers trilogy, so I'm doing this review as sort of an extension of that series of reviews. Now, the film is directed by Luca Guadagnino. I'm not sure if I'm saying his last name right, but he previously directed the film Call Me By Your Name. The movie's written by David. This is another last name that I'm not sure if I'll be able to pronounce, but the screenwriter for this movie previously worked with the director on a film called A Bigger Splash, and he also wrote the screenplay for the upcoming adaptation of Stephen King's Pet Sematary. Now, I know this film has been getting a lot of polarizing reviews, but personally, I loved this. I thought this was a really good movie. Like, not even just a really good remake, but a really good movie in general. Now, of course, there's inevitable comparisons to the original, but to me, this is such a different film from the original that it's really not fair to compare the two, because they're two very different films. I feel like you would watch for two different reasons, and it's really not fair, in my opinion, to say one is better than the other. But yeah, once again, I thought this was a really well done movie, and whether you like the movie or not, you can't deny that the film is at least ambitious. This is a very ambitious film, and really that's what I wanted out of a Suspiria remake. I wanted something ambitious. I wanted something that had actual passion behind it. Whether it turned out good or bad, I at least wanted to know that the filmmakers were trying to make a good movie, because the one thing I definitely did not want to see for a Suspiria remake is either a shot-by-shot remake or a remake where it's clear that the filmmakers are just making it to make a quick buck, like something like the Nightmare on Elm Street remake or something. Like, I did not want this remake to turn out like something like that. Now, the plot of Suspiria 2018 is it's set in Berlin in 1977, and it follows an American named Susie Banyan, who comes from a Mennonite family in Ohio, but she goes to a dance academy in West Berlin, and eventually in the film it's revealed that this dance academy is run by a coven of witches. In the film you also follow a psychiatrist, and one of his patients was a girl from this dance academy who discovered the academy's dark secret. So in the film, he tries to investigate into this dance academy, but that's really all I want to say about the plotline of the Suspiria remake, because I really don't want to give away too much about this movie. Now, in the film, Dakota Johnson plays Susie Banyan, and she does do a pretty good job in the film, but I will say her performance is not the strongest performance in the film, but I don't know how much of that is really Dakota Johnson, or how much of that is just the way the character of Susie is written in this film. But the character of Susie Banyan in the beginning of the film is a very shy and timid person, and of course when you find out about the community she came from, she really does play this sort of naive girl very well, and the character of Susie is much different than her counterpart in the original film. She's almost a completely different character, and I will say it did get a little predictable because I kind of guessed what they were going to do with the Susie Banyan character early on, but it was still interesting though, and once again, Johnson person, she did do a good job. In the movie, Mia Goth plays Sarah, who is loosely based on a character of the same name from the original film, and she does do a really good job in this film. She also did a really good job. She was in A Cure for Wellness last year. That's another movie that I personally liked, but I know a lot of people didn't like. Chloe Grace Moretz also has a small role in this film. But for me, the standout performance in this film was definitely Tilda Swinton as Madame Blanc, who is a dance instructor and is one of the witches, and she's amazing in this film. And in the film, you really do see this interesting relationship develop between her and Susie. Now, I already mentioned the psychiatrist in my plot description of the film. Now, the character's name is Dr. Joseph Klemper. I'm not sure if I'm saying his last name right, but I liked this character a lot, and I liked how this character, for all intents and purposes, kind of became the protagonist of the film. And the arc that this character goes through is actually really heartbreaking, especially when you find out that he was separated from his wife during the Second World War. Now, my only issue with this, at least this was an issue I had when I was watching the movie, when I found out more background information, I completely got over this issue, but I could see this being an issue for other people, but the character is so clearly played by a younger actor wearing old man makeup, and personally, I hate when they do that. Like, I don't see why they can't just hire an older actor. That was until I found out who was playing this old man. This old man is actually played by Tilda Swinton. When I found that out, I was like, you know what? I'm strangely okay with that. Which is another reason why I think Tilda Swinton definitely gives the best performance in this film, because she plays 3 separate characters in this movie. She also plays Helena Marcos, who is the leader of these witches, but I won't give too much away about what they do with this character at the end of the film. And Jessica Harper, who played Susie Banyan in the original film, she has a very small role in this movie. But I gotta say, for the most part, all the acting in this movie is really good. I also think the film's beautifully shot, especially some of the dance sequences in the film I thought were very well done. Now, the movie does not have the same color palette as the original film. Like, I think the original film has some of the most beautiful uses of color and lighting I've seen in any movie. But this movie goes for a much bleaker tone, but I think that works better for this movie. Like, the movie's set in Berlin in 1977, and if you keep in mind what was going on politically at the time, Berlin was kind of a bleak place, so it makes sense that the film has such a bleak tone. Now, this is definitely a slow burn, and I could see that being a problem for some people. The film's 2.5 hours long, and it is a very slow-paced film, but there's a huge difference between slow and boring, at least for me. But I think a lot of people are going to consider this to be boring because it's a horror film where a lot of the horror elements are kind of used sparingly, but that's actually something I really liked about the film. I liked how this was also sort of a drama film, or at least it was just as much a drama film as it was a horror film. This movie has some horrific scenes in it. Like, the first kill in the film is so freaking brutal and so freaking disturbing, and I think is one of the best horror sequences in recent years. Also, the score by Tom York of Radiohead is absolutely beautiful. Now I want to touch on some of the political and social themes that the movie tries to touch on, which has been both a source of praise and criticism for the film. As I pointed out already, the film is set in Germany in the late 70s, and a lot of what was going on politically at the time is very much the backdrop of this movie. Like, the movie is happening concurrently with the kidnapping of Hans Martin Schleyer by the RAF, and you could argue whether or not the backdrop really gels well with the whole story of the witches. but I didn't mind it personally. I thought this supernatural horror story with the backdrop of what's going on with the RAF terrorists, I thought it was interesting, honestly. The movie also sort of touches on the theme of national guilt, because this is set a little over 30 years after the end of World War II, and you really see how Berlin is this city trying to rebuild itself after the war, and is a city that this time was literally divided with the East and the West. And I think you really do see those themes come through with the character of Josef Klemper, because this is a man who's very much haunted by the ghost of World War II. But another theme I kind of picked up on in this movie is this idea of cults and the cult-like mentality. And obviously you have this coven of witches who are kind of a cult in a way, but it almost compares the world of dance to that of a cult, and it talks about how dancers really do push their bodies to the limit. In a lot of ways, you could compare this movie to Darren Aronofsky's Black Swan. But to go back to the whole theme of cults, as I pointed out already, in the movie you find out that Susie came from a Mennonite family, and I think they were trying to show an obvious parallel between this world of witches and dance to this very, like, repressive Christian community that she came from. The movie also reminded me a lot of the 1981 film Possession, which was also a supernatural horror film set in Berlin with the backdrop of the Cold War. Like, this movie almost felt like a cross between the original Suspiria, Possession, and Black Swan. But yeah, personally, I was impressed with this movie. I understand some of the problems that people are having with this film, and I'm not going to say it's a flawless film by any means, but it's a film that I personally enjoyed a lot. And again, whether this film turned out good or bad, I at least appreciate that this film was ambitious, and that's what I wanted out of a Suspiria remake, and I appreciated that this film really did try to be more artistically driven, because the original Suspiria was kind of an art film, so it made sense that this is an art film as well. But again, I know it's not going to be everybody's cup of tea, but I really liked this movie. And don't be put off just because it's a remake of a classic film. They really did try to do some interesting things with this movie. So I hope you enjoyed my review of Suspiria 2018, and I hope you enjoyed this year's horror month, even though, once again, this has been a late installment of horror month. This actually is not going to be the last video in this year's horror month. I have one more video planned, and that video is a retrospective on George Romero's Living Dead series that I did with several friends of mine. So that's going to be my next video, and bye.